webinar. Welcome to this special webinar in honour of World Introvert Day. I'll do a bit of an introduction later on, but many of you will know that I always do something special on World Introvert Day. But actually, I'm doing something even more special this time, because what I'm doing is this special webinar, which is around finding wholesome resilience. Now, that may sound like a somewhat unusual phrase to you, and certainly it was to me until I found it, until I developed it. So let's just start with a few simple questions to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time. So as I'm asking these questions, please feel free to pop the answers in the chat wherever you're watching. And I've got a team who are producing this behind the scenes for me, and they'll share some of your answers with me. So the first question is, have you ever been knocked off course by someone's words or deeds? Now, whether they were intentional or not, whether they were malicious or not, but something somebody has said or done has just stopped you in your tracks and taken you off course. If that's ever happened to you, then feel free to put a yes in the chat for us. Second question is, have you ever been told that you need to man up or woman up or grow a pair, or, as I know is one of the kind of tendencies these days, being told that you're too much of a snowflake, perhaps? Has that ever happened to you? Again, if you have, then pop that in the chat. And then the final question, just to make sure you're in the right place at the right time. Have you ever doubted yourself to the point of incapacity or immobility? Christelle, yeah, there's some yeses coming in. And certainly that was the case for me. And it's one of the reasons why I knew I needed to develop like another layer of resilience over and above, or what we'll find out actually is underneath what we've already got. So I doubt that you're alone here. So let's start to look at the intentions for this session. So the first thing I'll do is go back to basics and kind of define what we mean by resilience, and also talk about some of the misconceptions, because there are sadly many misconceptions around this. I'll then go on to talk about what I mean by wholesome resilience. And because for me it was the missing piece of the jigsaw, I hope it will also be something that works really well for you too. I'll then get you started on some practical exercises to find your wholesome resilience. And we need to be aware that in the 60 minutes we've got together today, there's only so much we can do. But I want to give you the exercises that you can continue on beyond this. And then we'll finish up this session with a Q&A, because whilst I'll be looking at questions as they come in, and again, the team are going to share any relevant questions on the screen as and when we feel it's appropriate to answer them, then it's really useful for us to spend that time answering questions at the end, or have a dedicated time at the end. Now, my intention, I am really finicky about making sure that I respect people's time. So this will be done within the 60 minutes. And if there are still questions that hang over after that, you're more than welcome to stay on. I will stay on, but the meat of the presentation and the learning that I'm sharing with you will be done within the 60 minutes. That's my absolute commitment to you. You're welcome, JP. Thank you. So why listen to me? I'm only going to give you the short version of this, because we've only got 60 minutes. You don't need the long version. But here are a few things that may persuade you that it's actually a fairly good, time for you to be here listening to me. I've had over 36 years as a L&D, learning and development consultant, originally working in BT, and for nearly 30 years now running my own L&D business with clients around the globe. So this is my business, this stuff. It's not something that I've just decided to do within the last year or so. In 2008, I completed a master's MSc in change agent skills and strategies. So what, you might say? Well, if estate agents or real estate agents help you find the right property and travel agents help you find the right holiday, change agents help you figure out how is best for you to change in ways that you want to and need to change. So that's part of my role as a facilitator of that process. As you can see, that was fairly recently, so I'm a late developer, and there's nothing wrong with that either. In 2019, I delivered a TEDx, which was about shifting the extroversion bias to unlock the potential of introverts, because this topic, the extroversion bias, enabling introverts to flourish, helping us be as resilient as we can be, really matters to me. This is my purpose and my passion, and actually enabling introverts to flourish is the purpose of my life now, frankly, until I turn my toes up. So I hope that's given you enough reasons to realize that I'm worth listening to, and I'm going to be pulling on other people's work and referring you elsewhere too. So let's start with those misconceptions, because I said I would share some of those with you. If we think about where the term resilience came from, it often stemmed from the kind of stress management world. And we started to think about resilience as being this, ability to bounce back. Well, where did that come from? It actually came from the kind of physical sciences world, where materials that are resilient are able to return to their original state after they've been had extreme pressure or stress exerted on them. So imagine an elastic band, for instance. That would be a resilient material because it goes back to its original shape. Okay, all well and good. But the problem became when actually some leaders expected us to behave like materials. So it doesn't matter how much pressure we put on you, we expect you to ping straight back into the same place. And what that has actually done to us is now some organizations are kind of weaponizing resilience, in that we'll keep piling on the pressure, we'll keep loading you up, we'll keep expecting you to do more hours, to deal with more. And if you're good enough, if you're resilient, you'll be able to take it. Not the right approach. So the problem with that, of course, is that having feelings, talking about feelings, especially with managers or leaders, becomes a kind of a no-no thing to do, because if you're resilient, you don't need to talk about feelings, you just get on and do it. So we really need to shift this misconception that resilience isn't necessarily about being able to bounce back, because we are more than mere materials. So the definition that I've chosen, and of course there are many definitions of resilience when it comes to human resilience, is this one from Pemberton from 2015. Resilience is the capacity to remain flexible in our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So in that way, we are a bit like an elastic band, in that we can still flex and move. And we can do that when faced with disruption in life, extended periods of pressure, so that, but here's the so that, not so that we bounce back in exactly the same form, but so that we emerge from difficulty stronger, wiser, and more able. Now, that is quite a different definition to the ones that I've seen used in organizations. And it is the basis on which my wholesome resilience is actually built. And I think the things we really need to focus on in that definition are the stronger, wiser, and more able. They're the things we really need to think about. So for those of you who've, thank you, yeah, great comments coming in. For those of you who work in organizations, who've been through any kind of stress management training, who maybe have now kind of been taken down the resilience route, because there is a draw to that, or a tendency towards that at the moment, you may well have come across these 4 types of resilience. The first one is the psychological resilience. And this is where we have the coping strategies so that we can stay calm and cope. Now, one of the things that, again, we need to be mindful of is that we're all going to react to what's going on, to what's coming at us in different ways, because we are different people. None of us is the same. We are not a material thing that is predictable in the way that it's impacted. But within that staying calm and coping, that doesn't mean we don't experience emotions. So the second type of resilience that we often come across here is emotional resilience, so that we know what we're feeling and why. And those of you who've been in my world for a while will know that I have talked in the past about previously feeling somewhat emotionally illiterate. You know, I grew up in an era where we didn't really talk about emotions, and I grew up in a very be strong family where we didn't talk about emotions. So I could talk about feeling happy, sad, angry, and then I kind of ran out of words for emotions. And it's only more recently where I've developed my own emotional literacy and can access now and identify a far wider range of emotions. But the key here is that with emotional resilience, we really tune in to what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, and why, so that we understand the things that we're going through. There's then the physical resilience, and, you know, this is enabling our bodies to be able to deal with the stress. Now, most of us are aware of the physical symptoms of stress on us, be they back pain, sweaty palms, fast heartbeat, you know, all those sorts of things. So the physical resilience is, how do we calm our nervous system such that actually we're then also calming the body in some way? And the final type of resilience that we often talk about is community resilience. Now, again, from an introvert perspective, some of you may be thinking, well, hang on a minute, I don't necessarily need a community. Don't you, is my question. This is the kind of blitz spirit thing where actually we pull together, we support each other. When I'm working with my introverted clients, one of the first things I'll get them to do is really put in place consciously a support network, so that they have the right people that they can call on in certain situations when they know that they need somebody to, you know, to talk to at 3 a.m, when they know that they need someone who can give them sound financial advice, when they know they can talk to someone about their behavior of their child in school, whatever it happens to be. But these days we've become kind of isolated from our extended families. So if that's the case, what we do need to do is build those conscious networks of support. Because we're introverts, we don't need hundreds of people. We maybe just need 6 to 12 people who are exactly our go-to people. So they're the types of resilience that typically we've come across in organizational work. But that's not quite enough from my perspective. One of the best TEDx talks I've seen around resilience is from Lucy Horn. And she was in a terrible situation where she lost her daughter in a car accident. And she happened to be a resilience expert. And she said now she could look at it from the other side. And she talks about these 3 as being the secrets to a resilient person. And I want to share them with you here, because these are also the underpinnings of our wholesome resilience. So the first thing is that we accept that life is a roller coaster. Bad stuff happens. And one of her great lines in her TEDx talk is, rather than saying, why me? Actually, what we need to say is, well, why not me? Stuff happens to us all the time. And if we go back to our definition of flourishing, it is about experiencing life in full through the peaks and valleys. So we know that life is a roller coaster. So one of the things we need to be prepared for, if we're going to develop our resilience, is to know that bad stuff is going to come our way. The stuff is going to hit the fan. We're not going to have a plain sailing. The second thing is that we focus on what we can control and influence. And this is that beautiful lesson from Viktor Frankl's work. You know, the book he wrote in his mind while he was a prisoner of war, and where he was observing the prisoners and noticing that even under the most extreme conditions, some of the prisoners managed to flourish, managed to thrive. They didn't cave. And it's because they were focusing their energies on what they could control and what they could influence. The same thing applies. If we want to be more resilient, what we need to do is bring back our focus to those things rather than have it scattered out there in the world of things that we can't control. And the final thing is that we're able to ask this question at any point in time. And the question is what I'm doing helping or harming me? Great question. Great question. And we're going to look at that question in a little bit more detail later on. It brings me, I suppose, to my question, which is, so is resilience different for introverts? Now, I can speak from this introvert's perspective, and I can speak from the perspective of my introverted clients. And for me, I can say, I think it is. And here's why. And I'll be interested in your views on this. So again, be prepared to put your responses in the chat, and I'll get the team to share them on the screen as we finish this bit before we move on in the webinar. But let me share my views first. My views are, I say yes, because on a day-to-day basis, we are contending with the extroversion bias. There is that continual low-grade pressure for us to be something we're not, to conform with the norms of the extrovert ideal. So we are having to be more resilient more of the time so as not to cave or be seen to cave in the eyes of those around us, especially in the eyes of bosses and leaders, etc. And I think compounding that is the lack of understanding of what it means to be an introvert. So today, during World Introvert Day, I've been running a series of lives answering some of the questions that extroverts, or at least non-introverts, ask about what makes us different. Like, why does my friend always cancel at the last minute? About why do people go to meetings and then not speak up? About why do quieter people not join in with the banter? Why don't they have fun with us? All of these things for me are symptomatic of the bias that exists and the lack of understanding about what it means to be an introvert. So from that perspective, personally, I believe we need to be, in a way, more resilient, have more tools available to us, because we are dealing with those situations on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and I'd love for you to put your questions or your thoughts, your perspectives in the comments, and see if the team have any that they can share with me. Yeah, thank you, Rohit. Resilience and flexibility, literally never saw them together. Well, you know, should have, really. Don't worry about that, because as soon as we do, we've seen it. Thank you. I think there was another comment just coming up too. I see a forced piece of clothing, pretenses we're expected to wear it. Yes, yes. Absolutely agree with you, Brad. So we do need to be more resilient in pushing back on that conformity, of putting our own boundaries in place, of saying what we need and what's important to us. So it seems like there are some other people here who also think that it's different for introverts. So let's move on then. So let me introduce you to my concept of wholesome resilience. And when I was thinking about what to call this, wholesome seemed like the only kind of possible word, because it is something that at its heart comes from that deep inner kind of ability to be able to know who we are, to stay grounded, to not be knocked off course. So it gives us a certain, and I don't really like the word steadfastness, but it gives us a kind of a certain solidity in the world, this presence in the world that actually says very clearly, I know who I am. And it's because it comes from this deep place of knowing within. So for me, it's the foundation piece that then makes all those other tools and techniques that I've learned around stress management and about kind of being resilient, it makes them all more powerful, because underpinning it all as a foundation is this absolute sense of I know who I am. And that sense of I know who I am, and not only I know who I am, but that I am enough, is what Caroline McHugh refers to as interiority. Again, those who've been in my world for some time will have heard me talk about Caroline McHugh's fabulous TED talk, The Art of Being Yourself. And in it, she raises these kind of three positions that we can hold in life, these three attitudes, if you like. One is one of inferiority. I'm not as good as. And so when I compare myself with others, I find myself wanting. I'm not as good as them. I'm not as successful as them. I'm not as pretty as them. I'm not as tall as them. It goes on. So inferiority comes from that position of comparing and finding ourselves wanting. The second attitude or position that she talks about is superiority. So I'm still comparing myself, but I'm going, hey, I'm better than you are. I'm killing this. It's great. And as you can imagine, that isn't my style at all. I did for too long take an attitude of inferiority, and I had to work out of that. But superiority has never been my thing. If I tell you that early on in the life cycle, if you like, of Flourishing Introverts, I was on a women's mastermind in Paris, and there was a big American influencer there, and she asked us to create a BFD statement. And if I tell you that the B was big and the D was deal, you can probably work out what the F in the middle was. So I was supposed to create this statement as to why I was a big effing deal. Didn't work for me, because that was like a superiority thing. This interiority is so pure because it comes from a place of non-comparison. I'm not comparing myself with others. I'm looking at who I am and I'm knowing who I am. So it's such an important place to find yourself if what you're going to do is develop that unshakable, wholesome resilience on which those other tools sit. What we need to be able to do that is identify a few things. One is our abilities. And the abilities are the things that, yes, please. Sorry, I've just seen there are some comments. Please pop the comments on and then I'll come back to talk about the abilities. Thank you. Nice. We've got people from Lisbon. Welcome, Sophia, and Australia. Welcome. Okay. If I've understood correctly, I like the idea of resilience not just being like an inert material, but rather more like biomechanics, where tissues are resilient and loading improves their structure. Yes, and because that's a pretty specific question, Jill. So thank you for asking it. And the answer is going to be yes, and in that they don't necessarily just by loading. It comes back to, what do I do in order to make sure that I am wiser, better as a result of the pressure I've experienced? It's not going to happen automatically. So I hope that answers your question. So let's move on to look at abilities. And this is where it can get a bit sticky. And I'll give you the heads up now. Very soon you're going to need a pen and paper, because I'm going to be asking you to make a note of some of these things for yourself. So as you might imagine, your abilities are your capacity to perform certain things competently. So they are things that are that can be learned, that can be honed, that can be refined. So they are things that I need to know about me in terms of what my abilities are and what they aren't. And I'll talk about why that's important in a moment. And then the last piece that we need in this is the qualities. So to know our qualities, and especially to own them with a sense of pride as introverts. This is about owning our inherent characteristic and saying, this is who I am. This is the natural kind of skills or talents, qualities, characteristics that I have. And this is what makes me able to do the work I do, to be the person I can be. But again, it's about the knowing of it. So my question at this point is, okay, we'll go into this bit. I thought there was another slide coming up, but I mistook it. So this is where we get your pen and paper out. So I'm going to go slowly now and give you a chance to start scribbling down. But I suggest you make a note of the heading and what you're doing, because if you're anything like me, this will take you some time to complete. I picked up this when I was working with a very successful business person, Lisa Johnson. And she got us doing this exercise. And it was at that point when she got me doing this that things really fell into place. And I mentioned right at the outset that this is a bit like the final jigsaw piece for me. And it's not easy. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to start listing your top 10 qualities. And remember, the qualities are the things that are not easily acquired or learned. They are inherent in who you are. So there are things like honesty, kindness, patience. Can I learn to be more patient? Yes, I can. But it's one of those things that typically I'm either born with patience or not. Can I learn to be more honest? Yes, I can. And yet some of the people I work with, it seems quite difficult for them to learn to be more honest. So qualities are typically those things that you are inherently natural to your personality, to your type. So for introverts, and depending on your type of introvert, this may vary, introversion, this may vary as well. So listening may be something that you are, is one of your natural qualities. Can I learn to be a better listener? Yeah, I can. But actually, chances are I'm either a good listener. I can hone it maybe, but I'm a good listener or not. So start making a list of your top 10 qualities. And I'll talk about why this matters in a moment. If anybody wants to share one or two of theirs, again, you're very welcome to, and the team will pop them up on the screen. And of course, you can imagine if the first thing you need to do is start thinking about your top 10 qualities, what I'm going to ask next is, and what are your worst 10? So Might be things like tidiness or tolerance or laziness. No judgment. This is about me saying, I know who I am. This is what I know about myself. And actually, those things are things that I probably wouldn't be proud of, but I own them. I know who they are. We've got another comment here. August, good negotiator, is Brad. I'm a good networker and motivator. Now, I'm going to ask you in a moment to really think about, are they qualities or are they abilities? This is where it starts to get really tricky. So let's go on, because the next piece is about top 10 abilities. So again, you might be a natural negotiator. Oh, Nikki, yeah, perseverance. Did you put that up as a quality or an ability, Nikki? I think that's probably a quality, I would say, perseverance, because I think it kind of goes along with patience for me. So abilities might be things like writing, public speaking, critical thinking. So I wondered whether negotiating was one of those abilities. I think it was August and Brad who shared those things. And then, of course, we've got them coming back. Both super loyal. Good. Yes, now they are qualities. Loyalty is a quality. Yeah, and Nikki, yeah, I think perseverance absolutely was a quality from your perspective as well. Yeah. And recognize that when both perseverance and loyalty actually means we can be taken advantage of in some cases. So knowing those things also means that we understand that there is a kind of a downside to it as well. And of course, if we have the top 10 abilities, guess what we're going to have next? The worst 10 abilities, which might be, remember, these are things, Rohit, patient, but also empathic. Nice, nice. Yeah. And if just to answer Rohit's point, or respond to Rohit's point there, in terms of emotional intelligence, we know that we can develop our empathy, and some people are born more empathic than others. And it's not unusual for introverts to also be empaths, which is a step beyond empathy. It's where you can't help but feel other people's emotions and kind of feel what's going on in the room. So these worst abilities are the things that, yeah, people wouldn't come to you for that, because they probably know that that's not your thing. So, whether it's filing, whether it's, working on spreadsheets, whatever it happens to be, you're going to have your own top 10 and worst 10 abilities. Heart-driven. Oh, that is beautiful. And I would say that's a quality, because you can't teach heart-driven. You can't learn heart-driven. It may develop through your experiences, but it's not something you go to school to learn to be heart-driven. You don't go to evening class to learn to be heart-driven. So that's beautiful. So this is the work that I really want you to continue to do. And we are going to, as I say, find some ways to talk about this. But actually, what I want to do is answer this question about, okay, Joe, you've got me to start listing my top 10 qualities, worst 10 qualities, top 10 abilities, worst 10 abilities. So what? How does knowing that stuff, how is it going to help me be more resilient? Here is your answer. And this is what I found for me, which is why I'm proposing it to you too. If we know and love ourselves for who we are, warts and all, so those worst qualities, those worst abilities, we don't need others to validate us. So we find our interiority But even more powerful than that, others can't invalidate us. Because whatever they throw at us, we'll know actually whether there's any basis for it, whether there's any truth in it. So going back to that question that we asked earlier on about, is this helpful or is it hurting me? If I take on board people's views of me, knowing it not to be true, then it's not helpful. All it's doing is hurting me. So for me, this was the key. This was that final jigsaw piece, in that when I know myself that well, I'm not going to say it's never, but it's so much harder for anybody else to invalidate you. And you don't need others to validate you. So the two questions, when faced with words, especially words or deeds of others, and I go back to that being one of the first questions I asked, have you ever found yourself knocked off course by the words or deeds of others? When that happens, the first thing you could be asking from this point going forward is it true? Because I know who I am. I know my best qualities, my worst qualities, my best abilities, my worst abilities. So is it actually true? Yeah, Brad, I want to applaud you for that. So it might have taken you 25 years plus. Hey, look, it took me probably 45 years plus to really start knowing myself and owning that. And that's the turning point. It really is the turning point. So I applaud you, and you're a great example for others to follow as well. So that first question, is it true? So rather than just take on somebody else's view of you, lock, stock and barrel, it's about saying, is it true? Well, if I look at what I know about myself, it either is or it isn't. And if it is true, then the second question is, can I learn from it? And what can I learn from it? So we go back to that original definition of resilience as being, when you've come through a difficult time, coming out stronger and wiser. And it's in answering these questions that enables us to come out clearer and stronger and wiser, because we're able to have those things come at us. And because we have that real kind of deep sense of, I know who I am, then we're able to be much more present and much more grounded in what we're doing, in our way we take ourselves forward. So where does that leave us? Where do we go from here? It's inevitable that people ask a kind of what next at this point. And the first thing, of course, next is to complete your lists of 10 things. And if you want to go beyond 10, go beyond 10. But get to 10. I probably took 2 hours or more to get to 10. And depending on the type of kind of experiences you've had, your mindset, your attitude in some ways as well, then it might be that you can find the worst before you can find the best. And so I played a game with myself when I did it, which was, fine, if I found one worst first, then I was going to balance that with one best. So I didn't just go down a black hole of worsts. I always balanced it. And likewise, if you come to bests first, balance it with okay. We are not perfect. None of us is meant to be perfect. I'm not even aspiring to be perfect, but I am aspiring to know who I am. So the first next is to actually make sure that you complete your lists of 10. I think there was a comment came up that said we're struggling to get to 10. You won't be on your own with that. As I say, it took me more than 2 hours. And I ran this past, I ran this past some friends at the weekend. Oh, laughing and surprise. I love that. See, that's the beauty of doing an exercise like that with people who understand you, with allies, because not all of our partners do understand us. Sometimes it might be we go to our accountability buddies or our coaches or just buddies in general. Not all of us are fortunate enough to have people who really understand us. But when you can do it with somebody else, then actually it makes it a much more fun activity because you can help each other out because you see different things in people as well. So your lists are obviously the first what next. And then there are going to be some other what nexts. It's about then actually taking that and applying it and using it to build, having kind of started to find your wholesome resilience, to build it. To start to say, how can I use that knowledge of myself as the foundation on which all of those other techniques that I've been taught sit? So whether it's a breathing technique, whether it's something I do, a meditation or whatever, but it always comes from that why do I want to say whirlpool? I don't even know what that is, but that kind of, that deep point of I know who I am. And not all of it's pretty, and that's fine. The next thing then is that some of you may feel drawn, having started to discover who you really are, that it's time to become braver. And I noticed that Nikki was here with us, and Nikki and Mariah were two of the people who undertook the Becoming Braver sessions that I ran in August. And I've tweaked that slightly, and we've now created a Becoming Braver adventure that's going to be starting on February the 22nd. I have an idea that should say January the 22nd. So hold me to that, but make sure that you put a comment in and we can make sure we get you the details of that. It's a 4-day adventure followed up by a masterclass just over a week later. Again, no charge, but the people who've been through it will tell you actually how much a difference it makes to kind of being able to be more resilient. Yeah, JP, it really does feel so encouraging. And if Nikki's still here, she might comment as well about what Becoming Braver has felt to her. And there are so many ways in which we might be able to work together. The best way to figure that out is to book a no charge clarity call with me, a 30-minute call that just gets us talking about what might be useful. And thank you. The team have put up the link on the screen at the moment for that, which is quiet.flourishingintroverts.com/clarity. And that will take you straight to my calendar where you can book your own time in to suit you. So if that feels like the right thing to do, it's not a pressure sales call. This is just let's explore what might be the right thing for you to do if you're at that point of finding your resilience, becoming braver, and maybe wanting to then really open up to flourishing as an introvert. So in the 45 minutes, I've come to the end of what I'm sharing with you. But of course, we are not at the end because I promised time for questions, and here is my time for questions. And again, the team is going to manage this for me. So as you pop your questions in the comments, they're going to pop them up one by one, and I'll answer them as they come in. So I'll wait a moment or two, have another sip of water whilst some of you get writing your questions, or it could be a comment. It might just be a comment rather than a question. And I'm not going to hurry at this point, because if you're anything like me, you want to think about a question that you're asking. Oh, thank you, Nikki. Nikki's just popped in. It was wonderful working with our small group. So that was on the Becoming Braver sessions that we ran. And that was the forerunner to this adventure, which is fabulous. Carmen, why is it so hard to actually be understood and accepted by the introverts? The perennial question, Carmen. And I have to say, yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. If you can pop that one back up, I'm happy to keep answering that one, the Carmen question. Yeah, thank you. The problem is that over time, the extroversion bias has become so embedded in education, in the workplace, in society, that it's become like the norm, this extrovert ideal. And one of the reasons is that I think it's so hard for them to understand is because pretty much the way we operate is almost the antithesis, the opposite of the way they operate. So they need to be in busy, loud, noisy environments and having lots of laughter and fun in order to recharge their batteries, which is typically the thing that will drain our batteries, especially if we've been having a full-on day at work and, you know, it's been a long day. So the reality is, and why I'm doing the work I'm doing, actually, Carmen, is because we can't expect people to naturally understand unless we help them, unless we inform them, unless we educate them, which is why I did the TEDx talk, which is why I'm working with organizations doing lunchtime sessions. I did one recently with a big financial services company, and you know, over 200 people showed up on a lunchtime to learn about what makes us different and how introverted leaders are different from maybe extroverted leaders, in that we lead in a different way. So this is a kind of a, for want of a better phrase, Carmen, an education program that we need to do to help people understand. So it's not that they don't or won't. We need to give them the opportunity to understand. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In the dim and distant past, you can't believe it now without just having spoken to you for so long, but people would say to me, "Oh, you're so quiet, you know, you never really say anything." And in the past, I would have mumbled some kind of an apology. "Yeah, no, I'm sorry." These days, I say, "Thank you for noticing. What you may not know about me is that I'm an introvert. And as such, one of my inherent qualities is that I'm more of a listener than I am a speaker. And I can only do that if I'm quiet. But the benefit I bring to a meeting of listening is that I can assimilate ideas, I can summarize, I can make sure that nothing's been missed. So thank you for noticing. I appreciate that." Now, all of a sudden, one more person, okay, maybe it's one by one, but one more person now understands introversion a little bit better. So I hope that was by way of an answer. Christelle, would you advise taking a standardized test to find qualities and abilities? Yes, the VIA Character Strength Survey is one of my go-tos for that. I'm a big fan of positive psychology anyway. A lot of the work I do comes from the School of Positive Psychology, and the VIA survey is fabulous. And it's free at its basic level, I think. So I can make sure that we've got when the replay link goes out for this, we put the link to the VIA survey in there, because yes, I think that's a terrific start. And it's down to how we answer it as well. So I think that's not a bad place to start, Christelle. So thanks for reminding us of that. Good. George, how do leaders, business leaders, take knowledge like this? Do they see the need for it at the workplace? My management gives such a pushback and thinks it's not even an issue being an introvert. Well, for that second sentence, George, I could read that as a positive, in that actually they're created such an inclusive environment that actually it doesn't matter whether you're introvert or extrovert. The practices and processes are inclusive to all. Where I could see that would be a problem is if there is still bias embedded in their systems, but they're choosing either not to see it or to turn a blind eye to it. So I do quite a lot of consulting with organizations. As I say, I run those lunchtime sessions, and they are always well received. Because what we talk about, I'm going to assume that the second sentence isn't because they've created an inclusive environment. But they say introverts can, oh, yeah, well, that would anger me too. And that's why they need an education program. What we talk about is the fact that how much talent is being left on the table if they're not creating a genuinely inclusive environment for introverts. So any organizations that claims to have a DEI agenda and isn't talking about this is missing a huge part. It's about to be released, but I've been interviewed on a podcast for the Centre for Inclusive Leadership, and they are now including this work in what they do. So George, find a way to push back, because, and if you want me to come in and talk to them, I'll happily come in and talk to them, because there is so much work to do, and there is talent being left on the table. And worse than that, people's well-being, health and mental health and well-being is being impacted. So oh, okay, we've got the classic now. My previous management, including HR, mocked the very term of DEI. There has been a push recently talking about, has DEI gone too far? And I've seen it in quite a few of the kind of HR communities being spoken about. The reality is it hasn't gone far enough. So all I can do is have empathy with you for that situation, and I'm glad you've chosen not to work, or you're not working with them anymore, is all I can say, JP. Good. Anything else coming up? Yeah, DEI has not even started yet. We need more. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Do you work in private groups or conduct public sessions too? Great question. Thank you, August. Most of what I do, well, there are two different strands to what I do. So thank you for giving the opportunity to talk about that. One is that I work with organizations in a consultancy basis. And what I do is I go in and I audit the bias that they may not even be aware of that exists in the organization. And it's in everyday practices and processes, from recruitment to assessments to performance reviews to career development to training courses to meetings. It is literally everywhere. So I go in and do that kind of consulting. And then what we do is we, from a report, put in place some fixes so that they can actually start to address the bias. The other strand of what I do is work with individual introverts, either one-to-one in coaching or in small groups and on programs. And in in February, March time, I'm launching the latest version of Frustrated to Flourishing, a 12-month program designed just for introverts in order to get them really to that place of being able to flourish as introverts and live a fulfilled life. So yes, there are different ways I work with people. Do you have any self-paced learning courses one can do in their own time zone, weekends, whenever they have time? The answer is yes, I do. I currently have one on my website, which is flourishingintroverts.com, which is around, it's called Flip Your Limiting Beliefs. And that's a self-paced course. There are going to be others coming soon, but that's the first one that's available to do entirely at your own time, in your own time frame. And what it does, that course, is it starts to look at the ways we hold ourselves back, because our beliefs, our belief systems, the way we hold ourselves back is often not grounded in reality. So we take those limiting beliefs, we examine them and say, actually, what's an empowering belief that actually moves us forward, still grounded in reality, rather than grounded in some kind of fear or fantasy that the limiting beliefs were. Good. Any other questions coming in? That's great. Thank you. Team is saying all done. So thank you very much for your time. We are just gone 55 minutes. So I'm true to my word. As I say, I will stay around here longer if people have questions they want to ask in a more kind of private setting. But for me, a heartfelt thank you for taking the time out this evening on World Introvert Day to show up and find out about wholesome resilience. I really encourage you to complete that exercise and to think about how that can form the foundation for your own resilience and for those other tools and techniques you may have learned. And team is reminding me on the screen, we have the link for the clarity session, quiet.flourishingintroverts.com/clarity, which will take you straight to my calendar for a 30-minute exploration. What is it you might need? As I say, it's not a pressure call. There's no sales attached to it. It is just to help you find your first kind of steps on what you may need to really start flourishing as an introvert. Thank you everyone for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed being here, and I'll probably sleep well tonight, having done 4 lives and now this webinar. But thank you for letting me share this with you. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the work of my team. Thank you.